Welcome into another edition, actually the first edition of the year, UNC Position Analysis with Jason Staples. We are sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com and
Woo!
Congruity. Let me talk about Johnny T-Shirt first. Great customer service, great gear, great swag. Get everything you need at Johnny T-Shirt, either on East Franklin Street or online. 10% off your order if you're a Tar Pit Premium Message Board. And then Congruity, another local business that's made a national name of themselves. They can handle your small to mid-sized business needs. Go to congruityhr.com/Tar Heels. Get a free assessment. Let them hook you up with the best service for small businesses around North Carolina-based Congruity. That is Jason Staples. I'm Tommy Ashley. Jason, we were just talking off air there. This is year 5 of you doing these massive amounts of scouting reports for North Carolina players. Does time fly, or does it seem like more than 5 years you've been doing this?
How about both? These are big projects, so and they take a chunk of time. So it does feel like a lot, but at the same point, when I looked at it and I realized, like, oh wow, I started doing this before the pandemic. Like, geez, that was a while ago. Like, all right, well, I guess it has been that long. So yeah, I've been going through the full roster of guys with prior experience who are expected to continue to play, meaningful minutes, is basically what we're doing here. And so I'm going through and revising, guys that I've done before, I don't do as much to unless there's been real reason to change a lot, but I'll refine those. And, if you got another 600 snaps on a guy, you got a little bit more on, okay, that's who he is. And then guys that I haven't done before, that's where the bulk of the work is going to be every year. So it's a constant process of maintenance, refinement, and then taking a look at some of the new guys a little bit more closely. So quite a big project every year.
Every year, and this year we will start with the defensive backs. If you've been on the Tar Pit Premium Message Board, you've seen Jason's been dropping them all since, I guess, last week. And we've got a stack to talk about here. We're going to try to split them up into position groups. We'll talk about all the DBs, including the corners, safeties, and nickels tonight. And then later, we'll talk about linebackers and edges together. And then we'll talk about defensive line, and then we'll talk about offense as well. These will drop when the last player of that position group comes out. So if you're watching this, you can go back and catch 8 or 9 defensive back scouting reports if you missed it. And let's go ahead and start, Jason, with a guy who I love. He's probably the smallest one of the bunch. And he will lay the wood, Stick Lane. Great name. Truck Stick, Stick Lane. Your review of him, obviously he came from Georgia State, played for Carolina last year. Was dinged up early, had some splash plays. He's got some skills there. He's certainly got the toughness, Jason.
Yeah, he's a guy that if he was just a little bit taller, a little bit heavier, he'd be right on the prototype for a lot of things. But he maxes out what he is. And you mentioned he got dinged up a little bit, and that's kind of the issue that you worry about with him, with somebody that's that undersized. That said, 5'8.5", 190. I'm not sure I believe the full 190, but he's 180 plus at least at 5'8.5". That's pretty rocked up for a guy that height. So it's not like he's just a small, slender guy out there. He's a guy that's worked himself into being pretty rocked up and does try to lay the lumber. He's gonna attack you. I think in my scouting report I said something along the lines of he's a linebacker mentality in a rocked up cornerback's body, and that's basically what he is. You can every so often, his eyes will get out of position. You see against again that first touchdown, first play of the game against West Virginia, eyes not quite in the right place for him. Sometimes that'll happen. He'll get a little over aggressive especially if you can present that run threat and he's part of the run fit. But that's all part of what he brings to the table. And he's a guy that the run defense is better when he's on the field. And he's a guy that in short yardage, you actually want him, as small as he is, you want him on the field because he's a guy that finds ways to get into his proper run fit, get downhill, and make tackles, down low, get guys on the ground. So you like that. I'd like to see him a little more realistic about who he can tackle high. There are times where guys have run through him a little bit, but all in all, he's a pretty reliable player. He's really smart. He's a sixth-year player with a ton of reps, and I think he's got a lot of leadership qualities. So there's a lot of positives there. I mean, 2,100 snaps from him.
Ridiculous.
That's a lot of football, and I think he's going to be a guy that I do expect them to rotate more on defense this year than they have in past years. And I think at safety, you're going to see a little bit of rotation there. Not a ton, but I think you're going to see him with 500 plus snaps. So that's not minimal play, not a full rotation, but I think he's going to be one of those guys. He'll be one of the first two guys on the field at that safety spot, and a guy that I think they'll also move up when they go to dime packages and things. I think they're going to bring him closer to the line of scrimmage a lot of times to play that money role and get him near the line of scrimmage so he can be a problem there while they have somebody over the top. I think they're going to do that a good bit. Quality player for him, and a guy that you can win with for the most part at the safety position. Not a perfect player, but a really good one.
Yep. Wish he was a little bit taller, still a baller. Stick Lane.
Yep.
You mentioned it, and I want to move on to the next player we're going to talk about, but I can't believe how much football he's played. I mean, 800 snaps 2 years ago for Georgia State. I mean, that's Carolina defense numbers of snaps right there. And the Georgia State obviously cut it in half being injured. I think he'll be an important role, and you can never have too many safeties that'll come hit, and he's one of those guys. Next guy, Jason, you did, and this is a young man that has played a decent amount of football, but another one that stayed kind of dinged up, and that's Will Hardy.
Yeah, he's a guy that I would have loved to have seen him get a chance to be healthy up front and really build his body up first before he ever got on the field. I feel like his growth has been stunted a little bit just because of those injuries. And to some degree, I mean, he's a third-year player, but I don't think he's really become what he could be yet. I think he's flashed a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but I think he's still got some room for development precisely because he's been so dinged up pretty much the whole time he's been on campus. But he did play in every game as a true freshman, despite the fact that he was battling, different nicks and shoulder injuries and different things. I think this year is kind of going to be the year where we're gonna figure out exactly what he can be. Where's the ceiling for Will Hardy? What we know for sure, 6'2", 195, more prototype in terms of the frame. He's a guy that you look at and you go, okay, that looks like a Power 5 safety. That looks like, traditional safety at the NFL level in terms of size and length and all of that. Maybe a little bit of a tweener to me. I would have loved to have seen him, say, at 210 as kind of a box safety. But he really hasn't become that. And he's not a true burner in terms of being a center fielder, but he is a pretty darn good instinctive sort of zone safety that you have over the top. That's kind of what he's become the last couple years. And he does have, pretty good long speed. I mean, he ran 41.71 in the 300 hurdles as a high school senior. So, he can get up and go, but like I said, a little bit of a tweener, a guy that hasn't fully developed yet into what I think he can be. I'd like to see him arrive angrier as a tackler a little bit more often. You saw it a couple times last year, but not enough. I mean, the highlight that I provided for this scouting report was him coming up and doing just that against Clemson, where he blew up a shallow cross coming across the field from that deep safety position. But you look at him and just physically you feel like he should be a little bit more of an enforcer against the run than he has been. And you wonder, okay, if he gets a full offseason where he's healthy and those shoulders feel good coming into the year, maybe he takes that next step forward and can become a little bit more of that enforcer. And you pair that with some of those other things. And again, another guy that has flashed some pretty good coverage instincts and has been in the right place a lot of times. you feel good about him in a lot of ways, and certainly a guy you can win with in the rotation at safety. Question is, how much better can he get? And I think there's a lot of ceiling left for him because of those injuries and more time to develop in this defense.
Yeah, certainly a guy that got thrown in the fire immediately. I remember the App State game. That's been, 2 years ago already. Thrown out there to play. He's another one of the guys. Got to stay healthy. A lot of people talk about football development. Let's talk about this for 1 second before we move on to our next guy. Development is a huge part of a football program, but it's tough for guys to develop if they're never or not fully healthy. Just sort of talk about that dynamic a little bit. It's tough for coaches to develop a guy unless they can stay healthy, and it's sort of the chicken and the egg type deal there, Jason.
Yeah, and it's also tough for guys to stay healthy when they have to play early. So, I'm very much, and I've talked about this on this podcast before a good bit, where especially up front, on the line of scrimmage, if you've got a son who's looking to play Power 5 football on the line of scrimmage, try to get him to go to a place where he's not needed for the first year, because it is a completely different sport playing Power 5 football compared to playing high school football. The amount of a beating that your body takes, and that's not just on the line of scrimmage. I mean, the beating that your body's going to take even in the secondary, even, at wide receiver and all of that. There's just so much more demands placed on the body that if you can get that first year to build up that armor and to really settle into being a college level body, that can really help. And it's just my view that generally a lot of guys who play early tend to have more sort of bumps and bruises that follow them through their college career a little bit more often. There are the freaks for whom that's an exception. They come out and they look like they've been on cell block D for the last 5 or 6 years, even though they're 18 years old. I mean, there are those guys, but those aren't real common. And I think that's a big factor. And then when you get dinged up and when you get injured and all of that, you just can't take the reps in practice, and you only get better by taking those reps and by getting to practice and getting to see things over and over and over again. Actually, I was just playing spike ball this weekend, and it's the second time I've ever played spike ball. And it's one of those things where, there's just no muscle memory built up, right? I mean, I've got an athletic base, so, I can be pretty competitive at it. But there's also certain things where, if you're playing with guys who've played spike ball, every weekend for the last couple years, those guys, when a ball comes at them a certain way, they just respond because they've seen it that way so many times and their body just does it. For me, I'm kind of thinking through the process still, and that's what happens, right?
Yep.
And what you have to do to get to where you want to be as a Power 5 level college football player is get to where you respond as you're seeing it without having to think. And that only happens by reps. And, some guys need fewer reps to get there, but everybody needs to rep it enough to actually get to that state. And, you can't really get those reps if you're not fully healthy. And that's been a factor for Hardy so far. So you hope that he can get a fully healthy summer, a fully healthy camp, and come into the season and play healthy, through most. Everybody's banged up by a certain point in the season, but play healthier and really take that next step forward.
Yeah, another guy. And we're talking with Jason Staples, Inside Carolina's football expert, discussing North Carolina position scoop analysis, whatever we want to call it. Jason's scouting reports are all over the Tar Pit Premium message board. Next guy, another guy that's had some injury issues. In fact, had them last year. Another guy that North Carolina fans are very interested to see how he can come in and help this team. Jakeen Harris, transfer from North Carolina State. Another guy, up until last year, Jason, that had played a ton of snaps in college football.
Yeah, this guy has 1,833 snaps in his time in the ACC. That's 1,833 snaps in the ACC. It's an awful lot of football. It's an awful lot of beating on that body, too. Now, he's another guy that's rocked up. You look at him, and, he's only 5'10 and a half, a little bit stubby, but 195, 200 pounds, and, he'll come up and hit you. no fear of contact. Aggressive. And one of the things that stood out to me with him is, you can see this actually in the North Carolina game from 2 years ago. British Brooks stepped up in pass protection to protect Sam Howell, and Jakeen Harris just flat out blew him up. Came up and blew up that lead block. Now, he missed the sack in the backfield. Howell did a great job of getting free, but it was a good indicator of the kind of approach that Jakeen Harris takes. Lead blocker, you know what? I'm taking him on, and I'm taking him on 100 miles an hour. And Harris does play 100 miles an hour going forward. He will come downhill and hit you as a ball carrier. He's going to come downhill and hit you as a screen player and that underneath stuff. Another really smart player. The instincts on him jump off the screen quite often. There's another play from that North Carolina game 2 years ago where he diagnosed the little wide receiver screen that Carolina had on for Josh Downs, and frankly should have picked it off, and it could have been a pick, probably not a pick six. He's not running away from Josh Downs, but probably pick 50 yards plus, because he came downhill and met the ball before Downs got to the spot on a wide receiver screen. And that's one where it's like, okay, that's a guy who studies. That's a guy who knows his scouting report, who does everything his coaches ask him to do, who recognized the formation, recognized tendency, and was right where he was supposed to be. And that's exactly what you want from a safety. To me, Jakeen Harris is a plug-and-play starter at the other safety, along with Stick Lane. And those two guys are kind of your initial starters. There's still going to be platooning. Like I said, I think there's going to be some a little bit more rotation this year on defense than there has been the last couple prior. But, I think right now, going into camp, your best safety on the roster is probably Jakeen Harris. And a guy that, he hasn't been in this system, hasn't been on campus with these teammates as much, but I think he's a guy that can be a good player. Now, he's more quick than fast. I think he's maybe mid 4.5. I might be overestimating that a little bit. I think he's probably more likely to be a 4.60 than a 4.49. I'll just say that. So not really a sideline to sideline center fielder. There are times where I'd like to see him wrap more as a tackler. He's going to throw that shoulder and try to knock you out, but you'd like to see him make sure he brings his arms to the party too. The lack of length sometimes stood out against tight ends. You get him up against a guy who's 6'6", and that's going to be an issue for him. But I think he's an above replacement level ACC starter at this point. So, you go out, if you went out and just pulled a random safety off of an ACC roster, odds are Jakeen Harris is going to be better than that guy. That's basically the way that works for a replacement level player. And I think he's one of your two starters, and you're probably going to get 550, 600 snaps for him this year if he stays healthy.
Yep, indeed. And North Carolina fans know they've watched the games you were talking about, the North Carolina games and North Carolina State games, and he made plays. And if he can do the same for North Carolina, it'll certainly be better at the safety position. Another guy that is coming off an injury. It seems like this is a theme. DeAndre Boykins.
Yeah.
It is and this is why you got to have depth, and this is why you got to have a ton of guys, and that's been the chore for Geoff Collins this spring and this offseason. But DeAndre Boykins, Jason, played a ton of football up until last year, and North Carolina lost him before the season. Played 930-plus snaps 2 years ago in 2022. Fully healthy. Let's talk about what he can bring to the table for North Carolina.
Yeah, he's going to be an interesting case this year because in 2022, he played, like you said, 931 snaps, and basically all of those was at that star position at the nickel spot, and he was kind of a big nickel. So you got different ways of approaching the nickelback position in college football these days. One of which is to go with kind of a cornerback. You take your third corner, ideally your twitchiest kind of a little bit shorter, sawed-off corner who is really good in a phone booth, and you stick him in there against your slot receivers, and you're trying to take advantage. You're trying to be able to take away that slot receiver, and a lot of teams now are putting their best wide receiver at times in the slot because they feel like a lot of times they're getting the fourth or fifth best cover guy on a defense. If you can put him in the slot and you can give him a two-way go, there's a lot of reasons to do that. So a lot of teams are countering by putting a true corner at that nickel spot, which is what Carolina did when Boykins got hurt last year. They slid Alijah Huzzie inside, and it worked pretty darn well. He had really good metrics in there. But another way to do this, so what you're doing when you do that, you're trying to basically win one-on-ones at that slot corner spot, and then that allows you to go with a little bit more attention in the box because you can use that guy as a one-on-one guy. Another way to do this is to have a guy who's a little bit more of a hybrid, a little bit more of a big nickel. So he's kind of partway between a linebacker and a safety, or he's a little closer to a safety body than a corner body. And to me, Boykins was always that. He was more of a safety body with a linebacker's mentality. He's another guy. This is another theme of these safeties. He's another guy that'll come up and hit you. And he's another rocked up body, 5'11" and a quarter, about 200 pounds. No question that he will come up and hit you. And, he's got good short area quickness, pretty twitchy, moving forward on that. So a lot of those things really worked well for him as kind of the big nickel. The issue that he had was that the teams that put those super quick slots on the field, the guys that could just flat out run, those guys kind of ran by him. And he had, he's a little on the stiffer side in terms of his hips, not really a one-on-one coverage player, again, more of a safety than a corner. What becomes interesting now is I do think this year he's going to get more of a look at that safety spot, specifically the boundary safety spot in what they're doing with Geoff Collins, where he's going to have a little bit less responsibility most of the time if he's lined up at that spot for one-on-one type coverage stuff, and he's more involved in the run fits. He becomes a pretty major blitz player from that spot. A lot of different things you can do there, and he's a really intriguing option there. I think, again, odds are Antavious Lane is going to be the guy at that spot as a starter, but Boykins is a guy that can give him a run to be on the field there. And again, as another reason why you rotate a little bit and you feel like, okay, this guy's maybe a little better against this matchup than this guy. And, we're going to run this package where this guy's on the field here at this spot. So I think you're going to see some cross training. I expect Boykins to actually play a little bit more at safety this year than at the nickel spot. Though again, against some teams, maybe your Miamis or somebody who wants to go a little heavier, a little bigger, maybe you put the big nickel out there and you let him go. But I expect to see him more at the safety, more in the safety platoon this year than at the nickel corner spot. Partly because I think they've got a couple guys at nickel corner that they feel really good about and maybe a little better about in terms of being able to cover one-on-one, which allows them to do a little bit more in terms of some of the blitz packages that they want to do. But really intriguing guy, a guy that as he gets healthy, I think can be a better player in the secondary, a guy that again, you can win with at the ACC level, partly because he's going to come up and hit. He's going to be a valuable player in run support and can run and hit.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Carolina fans sort of forgot about him a little bit last year, especially the way Huzzie slid over, to your point. We'll talk about Huzzie here in a minute, but he slid over and showed what you can have when you have a really good cover slot corner, the difference it makes. But Boykins certainly gets healthy, comes back, and he'll play a lot of snaps. Jason, in your mind, though, and you mentioned this, and this is something we'll talk about the entire time we're talking about the defense, they cannot have guys playing 800-900 snaps this year. And I just don't see Collins allowing that.
No, and if they're playing 800-900 snaps in the secondary this year, I think that's an indicator that they either had some significant injuries once again or something went seriously wrong. Because I think they've got enough guys that are, within the same sort of tier, talent-wise, to have those guys on the field a little bit more, to rotate those guys a little bit. And, frankly, the fact of the matter is, these are long seasons now, right? If this team wants to play and be successful in November and December, you got to have guys that are, approaching, say, 500 snaps going into November, not 700 or 800. Because, I mean, again, the difference there, that's, 4 or 5 games of additional wear and tear on your body that also adds up in practice. You're probably taking a bunch of reps in practice too. That wear and tear will get you. I mean, you think about it this way. Think about Travis Hunter. He's one of the best players in the United States. He's an absolute monster of a player out at Colorado. He has not yet finished a season healthy out there, has he?
He was worn slam out too. I mean, he couldn't.
He didn't finish the season healthy at the FCS level when he played both ways at Jackson State.
Yep.
Right?
And he was uber talented, but you see the wear and tear on the bodies, and he turns out, and he got picked on at the end of the year for it.
Yeah, by the end of the year, teams went after him at corner because he was just absolutely worn out. And you can't let that happen to your players. You want to be in a position where, again, you want to be peaking going into November, right? That's when you're going to play your rivals this year, right? So you better be peaking going into November so that when your goals are still on the table, you've got a chance to win. So, and I think Geoff Collins is going to rotate more guys. I think the one place where there may be less rotation is at linebacker, but we'll talk about that at another point. But I think in the secondary, there's the players to rotate a lot. And I think you're going to see more platooning, which should lead to better health, should lead to fresher guys at the end of the year. And, Mack Brown and company are certainly hoping that that's going to lead to better results late in the year, which they've not had of late.
Absolutely. We got Antavious Lane, Will Hardy, Jakeen Harris, DeAndre Boykins. Last but not least, from the safety nickel position, Kaleb Cost. Baseball guy who's played baseball this spring. He's in a boot for the last month or so with a stress reaction, not a stress fracture, but a stress reaction. Jason, he showed some talent and some skills against West Virginia, and that's why he has gotten himself on your scouting report list. Let's talk about him.
Yeah, he didn't have enough snaps. He's only at 72 career snaps, so he didn't have enough snaps for me to assign a full grade to him, but I think there was enough to actually assess kind of what you have there in a lot of respects. Obviously, when you see more snaps from a guy, you can kind of zero in on, okay, this is who he is. But there was a lot to like from Kaleb Cost in that West Virginia game. He came in, and again, Alijah Huzzie had been dominant at times as the slot corner all season, and then he misses that game with an injury, and we're going into that game going, well, we don't know really what you got with a freshman coming in and having to play that role. And then he not only didn't get picked on, he actually made plays. He had 2 passes broken up. He was targeted 7 times in that game, only gave up 4 catches, no touchdowns, and 2 passes broken up. 74.1 NFL passer rating on the season for him, most of which was in that West Virginia game. That's pretty solid for a guy in his first action. Now, I do think there's a lot of room for improvement for him. He's a guy, I love the long arms, very long-armed, rangy type player. Again, another guy that displayed some aggressive mentality, came down and broke on the ball and had at least one big hit, had some run support stuff, showed the ability to take on a perimeter blocker a couple times and maintain his leverage, all of those things. But he also, doesn't seem to me to be, one of those super twitchy, long speed guys. He's not a low 4.4 type guy. A little bit of foot drag when he's in press coverage. I'd like to see a little bit more foot fire there. That's something you can work on. That's something to get the feet a little quicker. Sort of upper body gets ahead of his feet at times, kind of leans a little bit, but could be a little smoother in transition. A lot of these things are things that are young player things, and can get better over time. Also got pushed around a couple times when H-backs got to him, and you can't let the H-back get to you, first of all, but he was 8, 9, 10 yards downfield, getting pushed around a couple times by those bigger West Virginia H-backs. So, room for improvement there, but as a guy who's got the potential to be a pretty complete nickel corner, you feel really good about him. And I think the instincts showed. I think the ball skills showed. The passes broken up. One of them was really impressive, getting his hand on the football the way that he did, and locating it so you could see kind of the baseball skills there with getting his hands up and with getting his hand on the football from that position. So, I think he's a guy that you can, again, another guy you can win with there. I'm still not sure he's actually going to be the starter at nickel, but a guy that will contend to be the starter there. And if he is starting at nickel, it's because he earned it, and it's because you feel like you're going to be pretty good at that position.
Options. That's what they provide is options. And look,
he's going to play. And he's going to play. He's going to be. I mean, he's going to be 350 plus snaps. If he's healthy, he's going to be 350 plus snaps, regardless.
Yeah. And the way he played in the West Virginia game is, where's this guy been all year? Type player. We will find out this year. I thought that he showed out there. He's got some good instincts, to your point, and we'll see. Now, we're going to get to the two that are probably the bellwether of the backfield. But first, Johnny T-shirt and congruity, and the national guys are going to pay the bills. We'll be right back with Jason Staples. All right, Jason, that is the audio version getting their commercials, but YouTube keeps right on flowing through. Marcus Allen, dinged up, tweaked the knee this spring. Didn't participate a ton late in the spring, but certainly showed his skills last year, and has certainly been a guy that North Carolina can count on as one of those cornerbacks.
Yeah, he's another guy where, I think he's got NFL upside. As a year two player, he was above replacement level in the ACC. He was a guy that was a plus level, a quality starter in the ACC. Not an all ACC player last year, but a guy that was regularly in the right position, a guy that coverage-wise, I thought was one of the better coverage players in the conference. Really long arms, he's 6'1.5", and longer arms than that would indicate. He's got a long wingspan. I think he runs really well. I mean, I think he's mid 4.4. I think he's a sub 4.5 type guy. Probably mid to high 4.4 when he's actually tested for the NFL, somewhere in that range. And so he's not a guy that gets run by real easily. When you got a guy that combines, that sort of sub 4.5 area with the long arms and the length that he's got, it's hard to get vertical on those guys, especially if they play with good technique. And the year before last, I thought his press technique was not the best. He had a lot of room to grow there. I thought there was a lot of growth there last year. He's still got room to grow there. I think he still could do a better job of sinking his hands and feet, staying in balance on that initial press, getting his hands on guys in the right position. And, I think he can take that further step forward this year. I think you saw some improvement in terms of the fundamentals across the cornerback position last year. Continuing to rep and deal with the attention to detail at that position is gonna I think further improve them this year as well. But to me, you see that the traits, the combination there. He's got a chance to be a really good cover player this year. The biggest thing for me, for him to take a step forward this year, are two things. One is he was in position for a lot of passes broken up last year that he just missed. He's got to finish. I mean, there are so many plays where he's in phase, he's on the hip of the wide receiver, he's using the correct hand to go up and try to make a play, and just misses the football by 4 inches, by 2 inches, 3 inches, and gives up a really tough catch. And you're like, oh man, great coverage, but gave up a catch. And he's right there. This year is the year where if he's able to take that step forward and start finishing those plays at a little bit higher rate, now you're talking about a guy that gets on NFL radars because he's starting to shut guys down. And there are too many plays where, again, break on the football on an out route, get the hand in there, swipe down at the football, miss it, and the guy makes a catch down at hip level, going down to the ground. And you're like, man, that just so close. There was a lot of really close from him last year. So that's number one, is finish. Number two is he made some business decisions as a tackler last year. And I would like to see more physicality from him. If I were his position coach, I'd be challenging his toughness, his manhood this offseason and through camp. You need to show me that you're willing to tackle, or I'm going to find somebody else to be on the field in those cases. There are a few plays where he kind of you could see he's ducking his head, he's kind of closing his eyes almost, and just whiffing because he's just kind of willing to. He's just kind of taking the contact, and I want to see him the fundamentals cleaned up as a tackler, and his willingness to get in there and be aggressive and be the aggressor through the tackle. Get through those guys, get your shoulder through the front thigh pad, wrap up and get the guy on the ground and do it with force so that you're the guy that's delivering the blow and you're not going to get hurt. I do think he was a little dinged at times last year, which may have been a factor there, but those two things, improve those, and I think you're looking at a guy that is in contention for an all-ACC type team.
Yeah, has the skills, has the package, just needs to put it all together like you talk about. The last guy we'll talk about, he certainly has all the skills. He has the ability. You've been on him. That's one thing about these scouting reports, folks. We did this last year with this guy we're going to talk about now. And if you go back and watch that, it's not going to sound too much different than it's about to sound now, just with a year at Carolina under his belt, and that's Alijah Huzzie. Jason, this guy is legit. This guy's the real deal. If he wasn't dinged up last year at the end of the season, who knows if he's even on North Carolina this year, but he's back. He's slated to be a starter at the corner, which is, I feel, his best position. You'll talk about why he's good at other places as well, but just a guy that he's just around the ball. And as a defensive back, if you're around the ball all the time, good things happen. He showed it in practice. He'll show it again this year. Your take on him?
This dude is a freaking baller. He is just an absolute baller. There are two guys on this North Carolina defense that if I was in an NFL front office, if I was in a war room come NFL draft time, I would pound the table for. Alijah Huzzie is one of them. Kamen Rucker is the other. We'll talk about Rucker later. But I would pound the table for Alijah Huzzie and say, look, you get this guy probably, I would put him close to a second round grade this year, probably going in. You get to him sort of mid to late second round next year, and I'm pounding the table for him if I've got a team that needs a cornerback. Because this is the kind of guy that, to me, is an 6-8 year NFL player at the cornerback position who makes a lot of money. He can play inside, he can play out. I think at the NFL level, he might wind up being more of a slot corner, but this is an NFL corner, in my opinion. He's a little on the shorter side, 5'11", is what he's listed at. I'm not sure, having stood next to him, that he's a full 5'11". Might be, might not be, might be 5'10 and a half. I'm guessing when he steps out there without, cleats on at the NFL Combine and, in the socks, that he probably winds up 5'10 and a half, somewhere in there. But he's one of those guys that he's built like a soccer player in a lot of ways. But a soccer player who's 190, 195 pounds. He's thick.
Yeah.
He's one of those thick soccer players. There aren't a bunch of those, but one of those guys that, you can't knock off the ball in soccer. And with that kind of balance and that kind of foot dexterity, that kind of foot coordination, thing that stands out about him. Well, there's several things that stand out about him, but one is the combination of his foot quickness and his balance. He is almost never off balance as a corner. You never get him outside his frame. He's the kind of corner that as a wide receiver, I absolutely hated going against. Because what you're trying to do as a wide receiver is get a guy to step outside his frame, to turn, to do something to where you can take advantage of that leverage. And he's a guy who's just so patient because he's sound. His feet are so quick and he's so balanced that he just lets you come to him and he's going to maintain his leverage and he's not going to give you. You can take that jab step, you can take the second jab step, and he's just going to move his feet and wait on you. And then when you commit, he's right there and he's going to stick. And it is a pain to play against those guys. Those guys make a lot of money in the NFL. And then you pair that with the processing speed and route recognition. He ran routes for guys at times last year in the slot, which is stuff moves a little faster inside too. And you're looking at a guy, is running a in-breaking route and he's breaking on it before the guy's got his foot in the ground and he's breaking up the pass. And also competitive plays with a chip on his shoulder, all of those things. Could be a little bit longer. You'd like him to be a little less stubby in terms of that. So, your longer, taller wide receivers are going to be able to go over him a little bit. But again, the positioning is going to be so good that those guys are going to have to actually earn it to go up and get it over top of him. He also is another guy that I thought as a tackler left a lot to be desired last year. And as a slot corner, especially, you've got to get guys on the ground in run support. And there were too many times where he got his arms on somebody or got a shoulder on somebody, but didn't finish the tackle, missed too many tackles. So that's another thing that I'd like to see with him. But, overall, this is a guy, and then I haven't even gotten to the other thing that stands out. He's got elite, and I don't use that word lightly, elite hands. When he gets his hands on the football, he catches it. He gets one hand on the football, he catches it. And all you have to do is watch him as a punt returner to see that. And I watched him in practice as a punt returner, watched him catch a ball on the dead run down near his knees and, just in both hands, never touched anything but his fingertips basically on a dead run and was never uncomfortable catching it. That, I don't know how many folks out there who are listening to this have tried catching punts. That's not easy to do, to catch one that's low down around your knees while you're sprinting and not break stride and make it look totally comfortable. That's elite hands.
And the thing to me is you don't hear the ball hit his hands.
No.
It's just like, yep. And just watching him in practice, he made some North Carolina receivers, who's a pretty good bunch.
Yeah.
Look bad.
Tez Walker couldn't get off him.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, when Tez, on the occasion that Tez was able to get off the press or whatever, Tez was faster than him. You could see the speed difference. But the problem is that he would wall him. Yeah. And it got really difficult for Tez to get off of him because the technique and the quickness and the balance and the combination of all those is just so good. And having him as an outside corner just allows you to kind of take away the number one on the boundary. And that's a big, big luxury. And I would pound the table for this guy going into next year as an NFL scout.
Yep. And if you throw to him and you throw at him, you better throw it in the right place because, to your point, he will catch it if it's not in the right. You have to be perfect to beat Alijah Huzzie. It'll be interesting to see how they use him. It'll be interesting to see how Geoff Collins uses that ability in this defense. That's something we'll talk about all summer, is the new approach to defense that North Carolina will have. Jason, we've been talking about the defensive backs. We've hit the safeties. We've hit a nickel back. And we've hit the two corners. Three other guys that you wanted to mention. And folks, Jason can't do every single 120-person player on the roster. So he's done a ton of them. But these three guys are guys you probably need to pay attention to as well. Jason, who you got?
Yeah, I wanted to actually do these guys because I think each of them is going to play this year. But there just wasn't enough film to give them a fair evaluation. There wasn't enough for me to look at and go, okay, I can actually give a fair assessment of, your strengths and weaknesses and so on. But when we watched them in practice, we kind of looked at each other like, those boys can play. And that's Trey Miller, Ty White, and Tyrone Stewart. And both you and I are agreed that Stewart is going to play a bunch. And that's another reason why, last year, Marcus Allen played 915 snaps.
Insanity.
You can't have that happen this year. This year, my projection for Marcus Allen is somewhere around 600 snaps. Just still a lot. It's a long season. But I think he's going to have, 550, maybe 575, 600 snaps. Let's say 600 snaps. And Alijah Huzzie had 727 snaps last year. Both of those guys will probably be closer to something in the 600s this year, even if they stay healthy all season, because I think a guy like Tyrann Stewart is going to come in and play probably another 450, 500 snaps himself. Because that's a guy that when we watched him in the spring, we both went, yeah, he's playing right away. He's a guy and there's a reason that legend Cavazos left.
Yes.
Right? He left because he knew he was not going to be playing ahead of that guy. And he knew he probably wasn't going to be playing ahead of Ty White. Those two guys had passed him. Those guys are going to play at outside corner, and they're going to rotate, and they're going to be on the field. You're going to see Huzzie take a break once in a while. You're going to see, now Huzzie's probably going to be the last guy to take a break, but you're going to see him on the field at times. Or you're going to see him on the sideline at times because those other guys have earned some trust. And same with Marcus Allen. He's going to be on the sideline some, and that allows you to stay fresher with guys. I think, again, White and Stewart are ACC level, plus level corners on the outside. And I think your starter at nickelback might be Trey Miller. So, Kaleb Cost is going to have to compete to earn that job. Boykins, I think, is probably not going to be the starter at nickel because I think Trey Miller or Cost will be. And right now, if I was going to bet, knowing that Cost has been in a boot a little bit, that he didn't play in spring practice, and what I saw of Trey Miller in spring practice, I might bet on Trey Miller to actually be the starter at nickel. Because he's one of those guys that has a lot of the traits that you love in there. He's really, really twitchy, short area quickness, hard to have one of those jitterbug, Ryan Switzer types or Josh Downs types to just get off of that guy because he's twitchy enough to sort of stick with even the quicker guys. So I think you're going to see a lot of Trey Miller as well at nickel. So that gives you really a full two deep of guys that you trust going into the fall in the secondary, which is really good. You want two deep at every position, and I think they're at least two deep at every position with guys that can play at the ACC level. And that's the strength of this Carolina defense is the back end. I think the secondary is one of the better secondaries in the ACC. I've got, as you know, serious questions about some of the things that they've shown up front in the past, and they need to improve the front six for this season. But I think that back five looks pretty darn good going into the fall.
Yeah, they certainly have got some talent in there, and talent acquisition, development, and all the good stuff. Jason, any final thoughts? I feel like we've covered it. I agree with your point that this is the best position group on the whole on the defense. Linebackers are going to push that. Of course, Kamen Rucker's in another level by himself on the edge. But final thoughts. How will this unit look different with the way that Geoff Collins wants to run his defense, do you think?
Well, the biggest thing is that they're going to be in press most of every game. So, Collins just flat out stated in the coaching clinic that I attended, and I mean, look, this is not revealing anything that anybody who's looked at any of Geoff Collins' past work is not gonna know. So I'm not revealing inside stuff. But Collins flat out said that he's a believer in basically being in press as often as you can be in press, because if you're just giving away yardage, if you're letting them dictate to you, then you're giving the offense the chalk. And he doesn't want to do that. He wants to try to take the chalk. He wants to be the guy holding the chalk that's forcing the offense to adjust to what he's going to force you to do. Now, again, that's something that every coordinator to some degree says, but what you are going to see is you're going to see a lot more press just in general. And from that, you're going to see, and I think that plays to the strength of your corners with Alijah Huzzie and Marcus Allen in particular. Those are guys who love being in press, but you're going to see a lot less of, guys playing off. When you're seeing guys play off, it'll be because you're looking at trips and, the guy on the outside is going to have to be reading inside, that sort of thing. And teams will have to formation them out of playing press because otherwise balanced formations, that sort of thing, they're going to play a bunch of press.
That is the defensive backfield. That is Jason Staples with his UNC scouting reports. This is Inside Carolina. Those are on Inside Carolina premium message boards, the Tar Pit. So go get your subscription if you have not already to Inside Carolina. There's no offseason, folks. It hasn't stopped. What is it? June by the time you watch this, maybe late May, early June. Jason's been working nonstop and will continue to do it all summer. We'll go linebackers and edges, defensive line, and then we'll hit the offense in one of these. But daily scouting report drops on Inside Carolina on the Tar Pit Premium Message Board. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt. Shout out to Congruity. And shout out to Jason for taking the time to talk to us and educate us all. Thanks, my man.
Thanks, Tommy.